This episode of Power BI and More is sponsored by Dynamics 365 User Group. The user group for Dynamics 365 and CRM community is powered by users, for users, and specializes in the delivery of member-driven education, networking, and events to help you maximize your current Microsoft Dynamics investment. Come see us next week at the Dynamics 365 User Group Summit in Phoenix, Arizona. Several of our hosts will be speaking, and it'd be great to see you there. We thank Dynamics 365 User Group for sponsoring Power BI and More from CRM Audio.
Do you want to hear it now?
Yeah.
Just so you can prepare for it. So now we're going to talk about Dataflows, right? I am then curious, why are there no sessions at the UG Summit and the PowerBI UG Summit about Dataflows?
Probably because they're still preview. I don't know. We'll see.
But they were at the BizApp Summit, right?
Yeah. And at Ignite. So.
Yes.
All right. So whenever you want to start, we'll crack it.
Okay. Well, I'm already recording, so let's get started. Welcome to Power BI and More. Ulrik, how are you doing today?
Doing good, thanks. How are you?
Good. And we have a returning voice to the podcast.
Hey.
We have the return of the Red Laces. Hello, Scott.
Hi there. It's good to be back. That's
Great to have
a
you back.
reunion show.
I like what you've done with the. I like what you've done with the place. Everything looks great.
Thank you.
So
You've kept
Scott
fish
wanted
fed
to come
and
back
everything. It's
because
great.
Scott wanted to come back because he's been playing with some of the new exciting things, and he just couldn't contain himself, and he had to tell somebody about it. So he chose us. So good news. So what is this shiny new thing you have been playing with, Scott?
It's the coolest thing. It's called Dataflows, and I think for Dynamics users, especially with those with the CE perspective, and customers that are with a fairly large data set, it's going to become a real enabler of for Power BI coming up in the near future. So I thought I'd share
That
a
sounds
little bit
great.
about that.
Tell us more.
Yeah, so I'd probably kind of clarify where it fits into the picture, because it has some parallels to things that we're already familiar with, and then it sort of replaces. It doesn't necessarily replace those, but it supplements those, and so just sort of put some parallels to where we have what we have now, and then how does this fit with it. So data flows. Think about like last year or earlier when we first started this. One of the first conversations we had was around how that it's when we're dealing with Power BI, we're looking at large sets of data, right? And we want to pull that data into Power BI in pretty good sized chunks. Originally, when we first started, you couldn't get much more beyond 50,000 records, right? But then after we added we took a couple of approaches, one being that we could use the data export service and push it out to a SQL table and then report off of that. That was one approach. Another approach was like using the Power BI, the Power Query editor, Ulrik, your famous tool, using that to bring data out through directly from CRM into a Power BI data set, right? A couple other ways we've done this. There's like the data export service down to SQL, and then maybe even from SQL, if we had to, we might even consolidate it into an SSAS, analysis services model, and then consume it. So a lot of different ways we've gotten data from point A to point Z, right? And then this is kind of a new way to get data from point A to point Z, and it's called Dataflows. And currently it's still a preview within Power BI, but it's so tightly integrated with the common data service and of course Dynamics from there, and how we're going to report it. And I thought it was appropriate for this audience to talk about it here, because it's coming, and it's real and it's spectacular to share, to leverage an old Seinfeld episode. But think about what we currently use right now. So when you're sitting down with a a customer, or you're trying to start an application, and it's a new dashboard you're going to work on, a new set of reports you're going to build, you're typically probably going to just start with the Power Query editor and connect directly to Dynamics. Is that accurate, or do you do the data export service?
Mostly directly to Dynamics. It depends on the scenario, but I would say mostly we just plug it right into Dynamics.
Probably the scenario would be likely like volume, right?
Yes.
And it's probably the scenario would be likely like volume, right? Yeah. So if we're still talking about a small volume, the way that you've approached it's probably still, perfectly fine. This really fits into the little bit larger data volume where we're talking about, in the order of magnitude of hundreds of thousands of records, even up to millions of records. But when you kind of cross that barrier for around the 150,000 records or so, I tend to find that then you're starting to get a little slow on the refresh, right? Not necessarily, but you start being thoughtful about your performance. If you're dealing with 500,000, 500,000 records, or excuse me, if you're dealing with 50,000 records, performance is not an issue at all. You can do it the slowest way possible. It's still fast, right? But when you get up into the larger data sets, you got to think performance-wise. And this is a way. Think about that first step is getting the data out of Dynamics, and using the Power Query tool. We're using that Power Query, that M language that your tool is developing, to extract from Dynamics from the through the ODBs, through the connection. Sorry, I'm tongue-tied here. But it's extracting it. We've written that, and you've written that query to extract it. PowerFlow, or the Dataflows, actually includes that component. And now you can just point your Dataflow, this new component we're talking about, point it at your environment and say, I want the account, the opportunity close, the contact, and the system user tables. And it's just check marks. And you can, just from that, let it go and move the data, start moving data into an area you can report off of it with. That's a first step. You could also use that same query language to say, I want to shape the data a little bit before it comes out of Dynamics. And maybe I want to remove fields that we're not using in our environment and narrow it down to just the fields that have data populated in it. Maybe I want to add some calculated fields to it that sort of finish the data up for me. I can add that using that Power Query language and bring it out and put it into this intermediate data store, which we're about to talk about. So think about it. Those are very parallel to what we've already had in the past. Dataflows includes that, but it also includes this new data storage area for Power BI. And this data storage area is based on the technology they use for really big data sets, and it's called data lakes. You don't have to worry about it. It's building a data lake behind the scenes. You're not having to build it yourself. It just moves the data from CRM, extracts it, and puts it in a data lake that allows it to be, it's kind of a read optimized data storage area. Once it's in that data storage area, then you can point a Power BI report directly to that data storage area and consume it and go to town working off of that. That way you have that advantage of you're not trying to hit the online data set, so you're not impacting performance of the users. You're working with a data set that's been extracted, and that's appropriate for reporting. The other cool thing is that data set can actually be supplemented with data from systems completely unrelated to Dynamics. We can pull in data using all the connectors that are available in Power BI. All of those can pull data into that data storage area. It can then be consumed from there. Was that making, kind of setting the context already? Is that making sense?
Yeah, it's making sense. And one thing I'm curious to hear, because there's a lot of parallels to what we work with the data. Like we use Power Query to retrieve it, and then we store it in Power BI. Now we store it in the Power BI Dataflow. How is it? This sounds very much like what we're doing now, except we just store it in the Power BI data storage area. I'm not sure if it has like an official name outside of the Power BI service.
It's still called the Dataflow. The Dataflow is this terminology that bridges both the extract layer and the timing of that, and the data storage area, and also the connector that allows Power BI to read from it. So Dataflow is kind of an umbrella term that encompasses this whole end-to-end data movement and storage from there. The nice thing about this is that think about the way we've done this in the past. If you built open up Power Query tool from XRM Toolbox, and you connected to Dynamics, and you pulled in the account, the contact, and the opportunity, and you only pulled in the fields that were relevant to you, you built it and brought it in and published that report. Great, that works fine. What if I want to work with that same data? I have two choices. I can either build a separate copy of it, so a duplicate of all that data, or technically I could point to your report and consume the data that's in your data set, right? I could do that, but of course, what does that mean if I want one more field? Or if you decide that you want to do something different with your report and you drop it? I mean, I'm stuck, right? So the difference is this the data flow now says we're going to bring this into a common area that everybody can point to the same common data store. And if it's been brought in from Dynamics, it's sitting in that data store. If you want to query the data from the data store, you can point to it, I can point to it, we're all pointing to the same data, and we're reading from the same location. And so the data, and we can read directly out of it. We don't have to necessarily pull it in. It's a difference in the way we've gotten the data. It can actually be managed a bit more. We can say we can put some filters on it and say we've ensured that the data coming out of Dynamics has already been filtered. We've already filtered out invalid records. We've already filtered out records that are maybe potentially high sensitivity records that we don't want in the data store. We've supplemented it with data from our ERP system. We've supplemented it from data from whatever other system that's out there. Now this common data store in our data flow is available for all of us to work with. So kind of a nice approach that it's becoming this simplified way of getting data out and available for other people to consume.
All right. So let me just try and ask this question the other way, saying like I start out and say I want to create a new report, right? I open up my Power BI desktop, and instead of connecting directly to Dynamics or data export service or another Power BI report, that data set, I will connect it to the data flow. And essentially in the data flow, all the good stuff is available, meaning I don't have to start from scratch and renaming the fields, removing all the fields that are not important, that are system only. It already has connections to all the different services that we might be pulling data in from. Everything has the correct data type, relabeled, don't have to worry about option sets, and I can basically just get going on the actual data work.
Right. So that data can be, because as you know, you and I both know, when we're pulling data out of Dynamics, we're doing a lot of cleanup on that data every time, right? We're putting some, like you said, field labels, we're getting rid of, making sure we have option set names, related records. We're doing, and then getting rid of fields that are not relevant to our organization.
Exactly. So much time that it was worth taking the time to build a tool for it.
Yeah, exactly. And so now we can instead of having this fragmented environment of everybody's got a different version of that ETL tool that we've baked into it, we're starting to build into a work group. And really, this is a work group type of an approach. In Power BI, you can set up work groups. You've seen those. And this is a work group feature. So these data flows are tied to a work group. Imagine that everybody who's in sales might be in the same work group. And so the administrator has already built a data flow that populates a sales-oriented data flow storage. And now anybody who's in sales can point to that data flow storage, and they've got a data set that's cleaned up and is appropriate for sales, and maybe it doesn't include cases, or maybe it doesn't include something unrelated to their environment. Could, but it doesn't have to. But they've got it focused on what they're doing. That data flow section, that work group area could be maybe a division. Maybe it could be a division, so that only the things that are related to that division of the company get pulled into that particular data flow. Maybe it's the European group has a work group, and only the things related to European transactions get pulled into it, and then they can operate that way. So, a lot of flexibility there that comes down our way with this. Yeah.
So when I create a Power BI report, then, because it's great that I get, basically the prepared data, the actual Power BI report, and when I upload my report to the Power BI service, is it then still creating its own data set for just that report, or is it being read directly off the data flow?
It's being read from the data flow now.
Okay, so there's no refresh rate from your Power BI data set to the data flow. It's whatever's the latest data in the data flow.
That's my understanding.
Storage.
So that's the way I've constructed it. Now, given that it's a preview, I reserve the right to be wrong about that. But
things can change.
Yeah. But at the moment, that's the way I'm using it. And but again, even if I'm pulling it in, even if I'm still pulling a little bit of the data into my Power BI dashboard, there's that last leg. It is just that last leg if I am doing that. And so we're still, you haven't recreated so much of the work. Maybe you're only recreating the last bit of transformation you need.
And you'll probably also save a lot of storage space, right? Because everybody's looking at the same data flow, you have one copy of your data as opposed to having 15 different Power BI data sets with a lot of overlapping data.
Yeah, and on top of this is all built on top of the common data model and the integration and all the connectors, the 200 plus connectors that everybody refers to. All of those can be used to populate this data flow. And so even if you're pulling stuff from Slack or from your team services or some other system external to whatever you're working on, it can still be used to populate this back into the data flow and be consumed in my Power BI report. So very, very useful in that case. The thing that I would like to, and it's also appropriate for, we're going to be layering some of the intelligence on top of it so that you can enrich the data coming out of that model. Just really incredibly useful for that perspective. There is and it's tightly bound to the common data model. In fact, they've built in for this, they've already built templates for Salesforce. They haven't built a template for CRM because CRM already has the same model as the common data model. So there's no translation needed for CRM, but they have built a translation for Salesforce to this. So that the Salesforce data can come in and be loaded into this common data model. So even in cases where you have different organizations within your different groups within your organization, maybe some people are using Salesforce and all the good people, the people we like, are using CRM. We can combine that data into the CDM model area and use it.
So, and do we know if the refresh rates are similar to what we currently see on the Power BI data sets? Do we have more granular settings?
Yeah, the interesting thing is there is a incremental data load available. So you can set it up to pull Like I said, run it and say only pull the stuff that's changed since the last time you ran it. So you can do these incremental refreshes, which is different from what we've been able to do using Power BI directly against CRM. The challenge I have is, at least in the preview, I wasn't able to set the incremental up against CRM, but I've got a ticket open on it, and we'll see if we get it and get that resolved. But so it's still preview, but the common data model, the data flow is pre-built with the ability to do incremental loads. So really good stuff. Exciting. I'm excited about it. It helps bridge that gap between what was you either go really, really simple and do Power BI directly to CRM, and that's perfectly good for really, really simple. But then when you start getting, okay, well, Ulrik, you've got that report against this model, I've got this report, and Joel's got a different report, and maybe over time the reports evolve, and somebody else says, well, I need that, except I want it blue, right? And so this fracturing of these data models can get out of control very quickly. Now we can point them to a common source, a cleaned up source that at least we're a long way towards ensuring we have clean data going into these different dashboards, these different reports. Much more manageable.
Yeah, you're not as much at risk of somebody forgetting a filter or loading the wrong data when you do it on an ongoing basis.
It also, just to gild the lily a little bit, it also makes it easier for, as nice as that tool is that you built, as nice as that is, that's not a friendly tool for a non-nerd, right? It's not something you're going to hand to even a power user that's not, kind of geeks out a little bit. As nice as that is, it's still kind of techie. This way, putting it into the common data model, it's going to be bringing it into this through the data flow into the common data model and allowing your Power BI report to point to the common data model through the data flow. Then everybody has, it's a much lower barrier to entry and much more accessible for people who want to do the self-serving, use the self-service approach. So very cool.
Right, and that's actually also how I generally introduce a tool, or who's actually using it, is because you do have a business analyst or somebody who knows the data very well that builds the data model in Power BI and use that tool to assist them, and basically prepares a data model that somebody else can log into, and they have you can make one report page, and then they can basically just click around and drag and drop, because they have that good-looking data model that makes sense, and you can use all those cool new features where you just double click on your report and you start to ask questions about the data. But there's assumption there that all the tables have the right names, all the fields have the right names, everything's supposed to make sense, right? And that's really the job of the business analyst in this case, or whoever is creating this data model, and can use that Power Query Builder tool to help with. But it sounds like now that instead of doing that now for every single data model and every single report that we have to upload to Power BI, we do it one time in the data flow, and then everybody can simply tap into the cleaned up data there.
Right. And think about, there's another feature that I didn't really call out, but data flows can work against other data flows. So I can have a data flow that extracts from CRM, and then I can have another data flow that pulls the same data forward, but supplements data from some telemetry for coming out of Azure. Or I can have another one on top of that then does some sort of cleanup of the data, maybe enriches it with geolocation or something like that. It's like Excel in that all these are formulas, and as you make changes upstream, all of these things run together, and at the end of the output, you've got this this data model that's cleaned up. You don't have to rerun all of those data flows in sequence. They all know that, there's something upstream has changed. I'll refresh to reflect whatever came in from upstream from me. So it's a really cool. They've really thought it's really based on the data, the big data services, that are out there, but it's just consumerized for us. So it's a nice approach. I'm excited about it.
I know that's very cool, very cool. And I think I read that if for even larger deployments, right, you could even replace the Dataflow's built-in data lake with your own data lake in Azure.
That's exactly right. Yeah. So the data lake that's built into it is included. You don't pay for it separately, but you can say, instead of putting it into this Power BI data lake, I want it to be available, this data lake to be available to other systems, and you can reroute all the data coming through these data flows and put it in your own data lake in Azure. All you do, then you're just paying for the storage of that in Azure, and then other systems can consume it that aren't Power BI.
So I'm curious here. One thing that we've been talking a lot about in the past, and you've talked about too, the data export service. Did that become a little bit obsolete here with the Dataflow?
I don't know. That's a good question. I still think there's some advantage. There's some value to it, but it may be because I'm just old. Maybe because I'm just old school. I like, in cases where I would pull the data out to a SQL database, and I could put views and stuff in front of it there. I don't know that it's certainly.
I mean, there'll also be the case where you have existing SQL reports that, somebody moving from on-premise to online, and they can, basically get that SQL database, and they don't have to redo everything basically. But for new deployments moving forward, I think there might be a discussion there on whether or not the data export service is needed.
I think we'll find that the data export services will be used for purposes other than just pure reporting. Like, for instance, it could be used for integration work. At times, I know that I use it as an integration source occasionally. So I'll have a copy of all the data locally. I've got all my GUIDs, so I've got all my values there, and I'll use that and join it up with something else in SSIS with Kingsway Soft and push it back into Dynamics. That's just, but practicality-wise, I don't think that if you're just doing reporting, this will be the way to tackle it. There's also probably a case where somebody needs other types of reporting that are like tied in with their systems, but that's fine. It's available still. I don't hear anything.
Yeah, one area where I've like the data export service, that Power BI allows us to do a direct query to it, so we can basically have close to live Power BI reports on our Dynamics data.
Yeah.
Close to live, near real time. So we're talking like, within a 2-minute delay, which in most cases will work just fine, as opposed to Power BI's 1-hour delay, unless we're talking premium and spending on that. So the data export service has been beneficial. Is that something we can do with the Dataflow, or is that a standard data source?
I'm gonna claim a little bit of ignorance on exactly how fast we can set the refreshes up when it finally goes to production, or when they GA it. I don't know what the final answer will be on that. But given that we've got incremental refreshes, I think we'll be able to get our refresh speed much, much faster. I mean, still, if you need operational data inside, a report of like which opportunities are open currently, or which cases are currently open and waiting for somebody to work on, that's still going to be the stuff you would do inside a CRM with standard views and charts inside a CRM, since that's like real-time on live data. But these other areas are going to be things where we're pulling it outside. Good.
Well, thanks, Scott. That sounds exciting.
It is. I'm excited.
Go with the flow, as I'm saying every day.
That's right. All day I've been calling it Power Flow, which sounds more like a plumbing product, but it's Dataflow.
Sounds like the offspring of Power Apps and Flow.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like, but it's Dataflows. Anyway, well, so it's been good catching up with you guys. Are you doing the Summit?
Yeah, we are.
Yes.
What are you going to be presenting?
So I have 3 sessions. I have one for the PowerBI Summit, which is an introduction to data modeling. It's called like the ABCs of data modeling. So it's people who are getting started with data modeling are like, well, why are we doing this? How are we putting this together? It's going to be a session for them. Then I have my Power BI and Dynamics 365 session, which is similar but updated version of what I've been doing at the various Dynamics Saturdays. So where we look specifically at how can we tailor our reports to be used within Dynamics 365, what are like all the best practices for creating links back to the records, creating links that creates new records, using images from Dynamics 365 inside the Power BI reports, grab the color codes from the option sets and streamline those visuals between Power BI and Dynamics. And then I was hoping to show maybe some of the new features that are coming out in the October release, but it doesn't sound like we're going to have that one available in time. But I can definitely talk to you about when you should consider using those areas. So I'm looking forward to showcasing all of those features there. And then I have a session which is aptly titled Charts with CRM Chart Guy. And we're just going to be talking about charts. And I had originally designed a session where we're just going to go through the various properties and how we can change them, what we can actually do with configurations and customizations on the charts and how we can extend them. But as you probably noticed, the new user interface, the new unified interface, works completely different with the charts than what they used to. So the theme has changed a little bit. Right now I'm just calling it what's happening with charts. So we're going to look at what are the new features. So what's new in the charts in the unified interface, which are based on high charts, which are not the .NET charts any longer. So we'll have a look at that. So where you don't have to do customization that you used to be able to do, there are now some things that we probably can do. And talk about what do you do if you already have a lot of customizations? How are you going to upgrade them to the new unified interface?
Are you going to be talking about how to use the dashboard filters?
And the dashboard filters. Yeah, so you're talking about the main dashboards or the entity-specific dashboards?
I want to know about both.
Okay, we'll do both.
All right, I'll definitely. What day is that session? I'm
so that is, I think it's the second to last session on Thursday.
Okay, great. I'll be there.
So they definitely put me in the back end there.
Before my red-eye flight back from Phoenix.
Right.
So what I'm doing is I've got as well 3 different sessions, really 3.5, but the 3 main ones I'm going to be doing CRM versus Power Apps, kind of building on what I talked about at Ignite and extending that to model-driven Power Apps, Canvas apps, CRM, CRM, how they fit together, how they're different, when you should use each. Have one about reinvigorating your environment with App Designer and Unified Interface. And then the third one is arguably the most exciting. It's the Avengers of Contact Data, where we are going to be wearing costumes and talking about managing your contact data. What's better than that?
Awesome. I can mention that there's a couple.
I bet Scott's regretting his decision not to go to the PBIUG Summit hearing that description.
Yeah, that's real close to clowns for me. And that doesn't work.
Okay.
So
I know it's good. It'll be good material though.
And that's a lot of good session. I think in probably for our listeners who are probably more so on the Dynamics 365 side than the Power BI side, or specifically Power BI, but use Power BI, is that there's a CMUG Summit with all those sessions, but you can at any time walk over to any of the Power BI sessions and watch those. So definitely make sure that you check out both agendas and see what's available. I know there's a session by Serena Stevens called Bringing AI to Power BI. That's definitely one I'm going to check out and see what's coming on Power BI and using those AI models inside Power BI. And of course, I'm going to be thinking about how we can utilize that in Dynamics as well. That's on the Power BI side. Serena Stevens is I believe a PM from Microsoft. That's not stated on the website, so I'm just mentioning that because she looks fairly anonymous on the website when you look through the program. And there's also a DAX 101 session with Tad Thompson. That's a part of the Dynamics session. If you are working with reporting in Power BI, we talked a lot about querying the data and basically building the backbone of your data model and having nice clean data to work with. Of course, the next step is that you're going to be creating formulas, and you're very likely going to be doing that in DAX. So definitely check out Tad's session there on DAX 101 too.
That sounds good. Ted's a good guy. He'll be an interesting speaker, and getting your feet wet in DAX is it's always, some of the stuff is so easy it's ridiculous, and then sometimes it's so hard it's ridiculous. But Ted's a good teacher. He'll enjoy that.
Right. Yeah, having a rudimentary understanding of it is good, and then as long as you get the gist of it, you can find a lot of help online. I know I have issues with my DAX formulas. I just Google it. How do I do X, Y, Z in DAX, and you get plenty of examples.
So, all right. Well, thank you, Scott, for coming back home. The homecoming. We'll call this the homecoming episode. And Ulrik, as always, thank you for sharing your vast wisdom, and looking forward to seeing you and hanging out with you some in Phoenix in about a week.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Scott. Been looking forward to hearing more about those data flows, so it's great to get some insights.
Good stuff. It'll be out soon. But
can't wait to get my hands on them.
Y'all keep up the good work.
Maybe you should build a plumbing solution for Power BI with flows.
That's true.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Good times. See ya.
This has been Power BI and More with Ulrik Carlson from CRM Audio. This episode was brought to you by Dynamics 365 User Group. You can subscribe to the CRM Audio network of podcasts on iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, TuneIn, or any place else that fine podcasts are offered. This podcast is a production of Dynamic Podcasts, LLC.